please state your full name for the record?
Harmon McAllister,
And where do you live?
Larchmont, New York.
And where does that lie in relation to New York City?
It's about 25 miles north of New York City.
Who employs you?
Council for Tobacco Research.
And what is your position with the Council for Tobacco Research?
I'm Vice President for Research. I'm the Scientific Director, and I'm the Research Director.
Would you describe your educational background for the jury, please?
I graduated from the University of North Carolina in 1958 with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. I received my Ph.D. from the University of North Carolina Medical School in biochemistry. I did 2 years of postdoctoral work at the University of Michigan Medical School in Ann Arbor, and I did 2 more postdoctoral years of research work at the University of Kentucky Medical Center in Lexington, Kentucky.
Dr. McAllister, can you just keep your voice up a little bit? Maybe the mic's
You'll move your chair a little closer to that microphone.
I'll try. Thanks.
Are you a medical doctor?
No, I'm a Ph.D.
Could you explain to the jury how it is that you received graduate training at a medical school?
Biochemistry is one of those disciplines that's in the beginning preclinical areas of medicine, and almost all biochemistry doctorates, PhDs, are given in medical schools. That's part of the curriculum for medical students, but I'm in the biochemistry curriculum.
When you were in training, did you receive any sort of support through sponsors or other organizations?
Yes, I received fellowships from the Muscular Dystrophy Association of America, from the National Heart Institute and National Institutes of Health. National Heart Institute is one of the institutes of the National Institutes of Health, which is the large federal program of research in Bethesda.
Are you a member of any professional organizations?
I'm a member of the American Society of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. I'm a member of the New York Academy of Sciences, the American Chemical Society, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science.
Do whatever you have to do.
What was your first job after you completed your postgraduate fellowships?
I was on the faculty of the chemistry department at Wayne State University at Detroit, Michigan, in the Division of Biochemistry.
And what did you do in that position?
I did basic research, teaching, committee responsibilities, usual types of things that faculty members do.
And what did you teach, and to whom did you teach?
I taught biochemistry to both undergraduates, undergraduate nursing students, undergraduate pre-medical students, graduate students in biological sciences, and medical students.
While you were at Wayne State, did you conduct any sort of scientific research?
Yes, I did research. Basically, it was a type of cancer research that involved how proteins are made in cells.
Okay. Could you just give a 30-second explanation of what the research was and how it related to cancer research?
Well, at that time, which was considerable time ago in the early 60s, one of the things that people thought about cancer is that it's simply cells growing out of control. And I had done a fair amount of work even as a graduate student in that area. And one of the areas that people thought might be important is basically cells continuing to grow have to make lots of protein. That's one of the things that cells have to make. And when cancer cells are growing, they have to make lots of protein, and yet no one really knew exactly how proteins were made. And I was studying that assembly process. Proteins are made by messenger RNA as a message from the cell nucleus. That was my particular area.
Was your work supported by any research grants?
Primarily the National Science Foundation and some from the American Heart Association.
And those were competitive grants that you had to apply
Yes.
for?
Yes, those were competitive grants.
Have you published your research in peer-reviewed scientific journals?
Yes, the research that I did both as a graduate student or also as a postdoc and as a faculty member were published in journals such as the Journal of Biological Chemistry, Journal of Molecular Biology, Journal of Experimental Cell Research. Those are journals of typical for work in molecular biology and cancer research.
Were they the leading journals in your field of research?
Certainly a couple of them were top-ranked journals, Journal of Biological Chemistry, and the Journal of Molecular Biology was the first major journal concerned with what we now call molecular biology. Now there are many other journals.
Have you published any books or treatises?
I did co-author a textbook of biochemistry. Actually, it was a textbook of general chemistry, organic chemistry, and biological chemistry designed for undergraduates, and I authored the biochemistry part of that textbook.
Okay. And was that textbook used in universities and colleges?
Yeah, it was adopted. It was used largely in the California State College system, although it had other adoptions in Europe and in South America. It did go into a couple of printings.
Did there come a time when you were at Wayne State that you switched into administrative work?
Yes, I became associated with the office of the provost. The provost is the chief academic officer in any university, and I worked in the provost's office in an office called Institutional Research.
And what position did you have and what were your responsibilities?
I became, after a couple of years, director of that office, and the Office for Institutional Research is responsible for gathering statistical information about the university, numbers necessary for budget planning, and in terms of overall planning for staffing of the university, and that general sort of thing.
In connection with those duties during this period of time, did you continue to have contact with the funding of research at the university?
Oh yes, part of that job is dealing with Office of Grants and Contracts. I did that almost on a daily basis, and yeah.
And what does the Office of Grants and Contracts do for the university?
They're responsible for coordinating the receipt of grant funds from all outside agencies such as the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, and making sure they're distributed appropriately inside the university.
As a result of your work and experiences, have you become familiar with the procedures and methods used by funding agencies such as NIH and American Cancer Society and other groups like that?
Oh, sure. Anybody who does research in laboratories is familiar with the process of applying for grants from most of those major agencies, yes. They're pretty much similar.
And you also gained familiarity through your responsibilities in administration at Wayne State.
That's correct.
Did you have any other affiliations during the time you were in this administrative position or otherwise while at Wayne State?
Yes, I was a consultant at a place called the Michigan Cancer Foundation. That was really only a few blocks away from the university, and they do both patient care and basic research in cancer, and I did collaborative experiments with one of their researchers there in the Michigan Cancer Foundation.
Was that similar to the work you'd been doing in your research up to that point in time?
Oh, yes, it was directly related to that.
When did you come to work at CTR?
1983.
Just tell the jury how that came to pass.
Well, as a consultant to the Michigan Cancer Foundation, I actually came to know Dr. Michael Brennan. Dr. Michael Brennan was the director or the president of Michigan Cancer Foundation in addition to his post at Wayne State. At Wayne State University, he was an oncologist. That's a cancer doctor. He's an MD. And he had heard seminars that I had given there and also at the Michigan Cancer Foundation. He was aware of my research. And he was on the board of the Council for Tobacco Research, the board of the Scientific Advisory Board. And he told me that a vacancy was going to occur there, and they were looking for someone with both administrative and direct research experience.
Have you been a full-time employee of CTR since that point in time?
Yes, I have.
So that's approximately 14 years?
That's right.
Are you an officer of CTR?
Yes, by virtue of the fact that I'm vice president for research.
Now, as an employee of CTR, are you an employee, either part-time or full-time, of any tobacco companies?
No, sir.
Could you briefly just summarize the history of your positions at CTR since you joined the organization in 1983?
I joined as an associate research director, and in that post, I was responsible for helping to coordinate the grant application process. It's a grant funding organization. And the grant applications, when they came in, have to be processed. And I maintained contact with the people who got research grants from Council for Tobacco Research. And then I became research director, meaning I kind of was in supervisory position for all of the grant administration process. And then in that was in 1986. 1991, I was named scientific director. The scientific director, in addition to other duties, primarily is responsible for being a member of the Scientific Advisory Board and evaluating grants. A year later, I became Vice President for Research and an officer of the corporation.
And you currently hold the titles of Scientific Director and Vice President for Research.
Yes, and Research Director, too.
In connection with your duties as Scientific Director and Vice President for Research, do you regularly rely on and examine the records maintained by CTR?
Oh, sure, yes.
And do you regularly rely on the staff members that have knowledge pertinent to their areas of responsibility?
Yes, I do.
What have you done to familiarize yourself with CTR's activities and operations prior to the time that you joined?
Well, in an organization that has ongoing research like we do, just looking at the files is going to tell us a lot about what went on in the past. So just looking at the files that are actually part of the corporate files helps a lot. And also I talked with people who had been there longer than I had. A Dr. Hockett, who had been there since almost the beginning of the formation of that organization, told me how things were done back in the earlier days. And of course, just talking to all the people who had been there longer than I had led me to knowledge about the organization.
Dr. McAllister, tell the jury, what is CTR?
CTR, the Council for Tobacco Research, is an organization that distributes money that comes from the tobacco industry to researchers, independent researchers in hospitals and medical schools to do basic research on diseases that are associated with tobacco.
How long has CTR been in existence?
Since 1954.
Did it have a different name at different points in its history?
Yes, it was originally called the Tobacco Industry Research Committee.
And is it a corporation?
It became a corporation, I believe, in 1971. It was incorporated.
And do you know, is it a not-for-profit corporation or a for-profit corporation?
It's a not-for-profit corporation.
Dr. McAllister, I'm going to show what has been marked as defendants 11086 for identification. Can you identify that document?
This is the Certificate of Incorporation for CTR.
Is that the
Council for Tobacco Research.
current certificate of incorporation?
I believe so, yes.
Your Honor, I offer defendants 11036 for admission into evidence.
All right, without objection, be admitted. The next exhibit, 4.
Defendants, I believe it's marked as E11036.
11036. Okay.
I believe it's 86.
Well, let me
Sorry,
just
86.
double check. Right. 11086, you're correct. I'm just going to put this little sticker over there so that she'll know that that's when she gets back.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. McAllister, what is CTR's tax status?
They're tax exempt.
Now, does CTR distribute funds other than for research? In other words, other than research funds?
Primarily, it's research funds. almost exclusively. There is a small amount of money that goes to support scientific conferences that are related to issues that our grantees study. There is a small program inside the budget that awards monies to young faculty members in medical schools. However, that's also for direct research. It's simply that the money goes to the medical school for their distribution to the faculty member.
How many offices does CTR have?
Just one,
And where is that located?
in New York City.
Has CTR made cigarettes or tobacco products?
No, sir.
Has CTR ever been involved in the advertising or marketing of cigarettes or other tobacco products?
Oh, no.
Has CTR ever designed or participated in the development of tobacco products?
No, sir. Not at all.
Has CTR ever undertaken any lobbying activities?
No.
In addition to yourself, how many employees does CTR have?
11, I believe.
Could you just describe the key positions and the people who fill those key positions and generally what the employee structure looks like?
Our president and chief executive officer is James Glynn. He's a medical doctor. His specialty is urology. He was at one time chairman of a department of urology at Duke University, later became dean of the medical school at Emory University, eventually became president of the Mount Sinai Medical Facility in New York, which includes both a medical school and a hospital. That was prior to his coming to CTR. Then there's me, and there are two members of the scientific staff, Dr. George Hashim, who is a Ph.D. in immunology from Columbia, and Dr. Arthur Eisenberg, a Ph.D. microbiologist who graduated from Michigan State University but was on the faculty at University of Rochester. And in addition to those, we have a vice president, we have a secretary-treasurer, sorry, and a bookkeeper, and everybody else is pretty much just support staff.
Okay. What do the members of the scientific staff do, that is, yourself, Dr. Hashim, Dr. Eisenberg?
We, of course, still have the ongoing duties that have always been there to coordinate the incoming applications for award of research grants. We distribute those to the Scientific Advisory Board, who evaluate them. We maintain contact with the grantees, with the actual researchers once the grants are awarded, and occasionally we attend conferences related to work going on at CTR.
Now, does CTR have a board of directors?
Yes, they do.
And who sits on the board of directors?
That's representatives of the four major tobacco companies, 2 representatives each.
And which tobacco companies are members of CTR?
There's Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, Brown & Williamson, Lorillard.
Are there other members of CTR?
On the board?
Yes.
Yeah, there are other members of the board who are non-voting, such as Burley Warehouseman and people like that, organizations like that.
What are the functions of the board of directors of CTR?
Their primary function is to set our budget for the upcoming year and take whatever administrative actions are necessary just in the running of the organization in terms of just of its administration.
Are these folk scientists?
One actually is. The president of Lorillard, in fact, is a trained scientist, Alex Spears, but the rest are not.
Does the board of directors of CTR play any role in deciding which research or grants to distribute?
No, not at all.
Now, does CTR have something called a scientific advisory board?
Yes, as distinct from the board of directors, this is a group of independent scientists from around the country, and actually one from Canada, who have expertise in the various areas that CTR supports.
And what is the purpose and function of the scientific advisory board?
Their primary job is to evaluate the applications that come in and to give them and to rate them in such a way as to we can so that we can rank order the applications in order to give money out.
Okay, we'll get into more detail about that process, but for the moment, just to be clear, is the membership of the Scientific Advisory Board distinct from the membership of the Board of Directors?
No, it's completely separate. The Board of Directors has no overlap with the Scientific Advisory Board.
Now, are any members of the Scientific Advisory Board either part-time or full-time employees of any of the tobacco companies?
No, none of the SAB are employees.
Okay.
Is employees.
What role, if any, does the Board of Directors of CTR have with respect to who sits on the Scientific Advisory Board?
None.
And how are the members of the Scientific Advisory Board selected?
Well, when a vacancy occurs through retirement, the area of expertise that board member had is obviously known, and so current members of the Scientific Advisory Board make suggestions for replacements for that position.
Where does CTR get the money that it uses to fund the research?
From the 4 tobacco companies.
And describe to the jury how that happens.
We propose a budget each year, and the budget is established by them, and then they give money to CTR based on, it's a market share kind of a thing. Those that make the most cigarettes give the most money, and in proportion to the amount that they actually produce.
And how do you decide on the research budget for a particular year?
Dr. Glenn and I get together and see what we think we could spend profitably and or well, and we propose that budget to the companies.
In your experience, have the companies agreed with the proposed budgets that CTR has put forward?
Yes, they have.
Now, does any of this money go to CTR staff members to conduct scientific research?
No. Scientific staff members don't conduct research.
Does CTR have any research laboratories where it does its own research investigations?
No, all the research money goes out into the field, so to speak.
So who is actually conducting this research that's being funded by CTR?
These are the independent scientists that are in the hospitals and universities and other not-for-profit organizations, research organizations.
Has that always been the case, to your knowledge?
Yes, sir, it has.
Are the researchers who get these funds employees of tobacco companies or
No.
employees of CTR?
No.
By whom are they employed?
Their employment is strictly with the institutions where they work, the various medical schools, hospitals, and research institutes.
Now, Dr. McAllister, if I wanted to get some basic information about CTR's research program, where could I go to look for that information?
Well, every year we produce an annual report, and it contains in it summaries of research projects that have been sponsored by CTR.
Now, have you collected and brought with you today the various annual reports that CTR has issued over the years?
Yes, we have copies of those here.
And are they collected in the box that's to your left?
Yes, sir, they
I'll
are.
take that one.
Your Honor,
Yeah, I'll take that.
Thank you.
Okay, while he's looking for
Yes,
that,
this,
this is.
Could you just show the jury what a typical annual report looks like?
yeah, the rest of these are copies, but this is an actual annual report. It's typical of the ones that come out every year. Would you like me to show what's in it, or?
You could just describe a little bit about what the contents of the annual report are.
The great majority of it, it looks like this. I don't know if you can see it from there. This is one summary. It has the title of the journal article that came out, a short description of the research that was published, who the authors were, where it was published, in what scientific journal, where else that they might have received funds for research, and where the researchers were. Now, this is not, the main output of our research grants is, in fact, journal articles in peer-reviewed journals. And that's what is the great majority of this book. There also was a list in the back of all our current projects, and then a list of all the people who've ever gotten money from CTR. And in the front, there's a list of our Scientific Advisory Board and staff, the current.
Your Honor, may I approach the moment?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I have pre-marked for identification the various annual reports as defendants exhibits 11059A through 11059M. And at this time, I would offer them into evidence.
We have no objection.
You so admitted? Do you have a box of them there or what?
Yes, sir. There's a large baseboard box.
Okay. Mr. Clerk will have to mark the box or do something with them.
I believe we've pre-marked each of the annual reports.
Okay. All right, well, as long as they're pre-marked, then.
It's pre-marked already.
Yeah, all right, fine. Just leave it.
Now, at this time, Dr. McAllister, could you please describe the process that CTR follows in awarding research funds to the independent investigators you described?
Independent investigators hear about us from either other investigators or seeing our acknowledgement on these papers, and they inquire about our program, and we send them a preliminary application form, and they fill that out. It's a short description of the project that they want us to do, want us to support, sorry, and that comes back into us.
Okay, what's the next step in the process?
That application packet is then sent to members of this scientific advisory board that I was telling you about, and it's selected according to who would have the most expertise in those areas. And those people then rate that preliminary application and send their ratings back to us, and we take about the top approximately 30% of those for submission of a full application.
Okay, and now describe the full application process.
The full application is a bit more formal. It's longer. It allows more room to expand about the facilities and about the investigator, him or herself, and about the budget. The full application, those who are invited to send a full application do so. It comes back to CTR, and that particular application is then sent usually to the same scientific advisory board member that looked at the original application. And at that time, they do a thorough review of that application and write a critique of it.
After this process of critiquing is completed, what happens next?
I failed to mention that it goes to at least 2 members of the board, so it's not just one person's decision. Those 2 reviewers send their reviews back to the Council for Tobacco Research. And then they're all collected, and twice a year, the Scientific Advisory Board comes from all over into New York and discusses these applications.
And what happens at the meeting where they're discussed?
It's all a repetition of one sequence of events. The application is brought to the attention of the board, and the primary and secondary, we call them reviewers, actually open the discussion about the grant, and then the rest of the board simply adds their comments, asks questions. When all the questions have been exhausted and everybody feels that it's actually, there are no more questions to ask, they actually rate the application by a secret ballot, and it's just a piece of paper. It happens to be a number scale from 1 to 3, I think in tenths or 2 tenths increments. Those are collected, and then we move on to the next application.
Okay. What happens after you've gone through all the applications?
And the Scientific Advisory Board then goes back to their respective institutions. We collect all these ballots, and we average the scores and produce a kind of like a rank order list of the applications, with the most meritorious at the top and those that didn't receive as high scores at the bottom.
So it's kind of like Olympic scoring, if you will.
I hadn't thought of that, but yes, very much.
Once this listing or ranking of applications is compiled, how does CTR then fund the various applications?
Well, basically, we meet, after the board is gone, we meet with this composite list, and we meet and use this composite list to distribute the funds. The scientific staff and I and Dr. Glenn are the ones who were at this distribution meeting. And we discuss each application starting from the top, and we keep notes of remarks the board might have made in addition to their raw score, comments about the budget, should it be for less than 3 years, or modifications they might want to have each application be considered with. And then we simply give out the money until just about before we run out. We stop and make sure that in the many programs that are part of CTR, that is the cancer program, the heart and cardiovascular system, pulmonary program, make sure that applications from those areas haven't been slighted. And then so we can take the last few grants, and sometimes it works out that it's exactly like the rating says, but often in the last, say the last 10%, we'll look at other areas to make sure we keep a broad representation of topics. We do this with a full knowledge of the board. I mean, the board knows this, they want us to do it, so it's something that's typically done.
Okay, and when you say the full knowledge of the board, you're talking about the scientific.
Oh, yeah, no, not, yeah, the Scientific Advisory Board, thank you.
You mentioned as part of this consideration whether a grant should be for 3 years or some shorter period of time. What is the typical or average grant given out in terms of time period?
It's 3 years, occasionally just 2, and after 3 years, an applicant they can come in for another cycle of 3 years, but 3 years is 90% of our grants.
You mentioned the SAB meets twice a year. Is there any other meeting that SAB members attend?
Oh yes, once a year. Those meetings are in the spring and the fall. Once a year in the winter, we meet for discussion of business that we just don't have time to discuss during the regular grant evaluation meeting. And we have people come in from outside who are experts in particular areas that are of interest to us, who tell us about things to look out for on the horizon of research.
And what's the purpose of having that kind of session?
Well, those sessions, the sessions at New York are very, very compressed time-wise. You really don't have time to do anything except review applications. And there are lots of things that the board likes to discuss in terms of directions they'd like to take and things that they feel that other members of the board should know. So that middle meeting is to keep the board, without the pressure of an agenda, let the board, the Scientific Advisory Board, discuss items of common interest and listen to talks.
Now, the meetings in New York where the grants are discussed, how long do those meetings typically take?
2 days. They used to be longer, but they're pared down to 2 days now.
And this, if I refer to as an educational type meeting, how long is that typically?
3 days.
Now, are the members of the Scientific Advisory Board compensated by CTR?
They're compensated with an honorarium for the days that they're at those meetings. They're not compensated for the work that they do in evaluating those applications.
Now, when you say they're not compensated for the work in evaluating the applications, are you referring to the process where they review and critique the applications in advance of the meeting?
That's right. That's exactly what I mean.
Now, how much time is spent by SAB members in this uncompensated portion of their work?
It takes anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, basically, or 2 to 3 weeks to do that. And so twice a year means that they spend anywhere from a month to a month and a half evaluating these applications.
How are the SAB members compensated at the time they spend actually at meetings?
You mean how much?
How much are they compensated?
They get $2,000 a day.
They get expenses paid by CTR as
And
well?
expenses, and they get a honorarium for a travel day, and their incidental expenses, that is, are paid, that is their meals, taxi fare to the airport, the plane fare.
Now, do members of the Scientific Advisory Board also have experience sitting on boards of other agencies and institutions which distribute research funds?
Almost all of them do, yes.
And you yourself are familiar with the processes and methods used by NIH and other agencies in distributing research funds?
Yes.
Is CTR's process, in your opinion, for funding grants comparable to the way NIH and these other agencies distribute research funds?
Basically, it's identical. That is, applications come in and they're evaluated by scientists in the field who then rate them on a secret ballot, and then they give out money according to the composite scores on those ballots.
Now, is avoiding damage or harm to the sponsored tobacco companies an objective of CTR's research program?
Oh, not at all.
Has that issue ever been a subject of discussion at a scientific advisory board meeting?
No, that's not something they discuss.
Has CTR's board of directors or any employee of a tobacco company ever expressed the view during one of these meetings or to CTR that that should be a consideration?
There was, I think, one instance where someone came. Is that Mr. Jacob came one time? But he's not an employee of the tobacco companies.
We'll come back to Mr. Jacob later. In your opinion, based on your experience and background, are the funding mechanisms used by CTR similar to and based on the same principles as the funding mechanisms used by the federal government, the American Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, and other funding agencies?
They're the same.
Now, Dr. McAllister, let me show you this exhibit. Can you identify what this is?
That's a blow-up of this page that's in this last annual report that shows the Scientific Advisory Board and staff.
Is this the current roster of SAB members?
Yes, sir, it is.
Let's just go down the list for a moment, and I don't know if we can see it. Could you just run down the list of the SAB members and explain to the jury the background and credentials that they have?
Well, starting at the top, Dr. Pierce, who is Distinguished Professor of Pathology in Colorado, he's a physician. He also is, his distinguished professorship is actually funded by the American Cancer Society. He was at one time president of a group called the Federation of American Societies of Experimental Biology. That's a very large group of 50-some-odd thousand scientists that work in biological research. He also is editor of a journal, one of the scientific journals that we were talking about, the journal Cancer Research. I really should mention that being editor of a journal is actually fairly prestigious. That all scientists supply manuscripts to journals, have them evaluated, but when you become an editor of a journal, that's usually recognition of the fact that you're distinguished in your field. Dr. Abood is professor of pharmacology and biochemistry. He was at one time chairman of that department. He's one of the leading experts on nicotine and the effects of nicotine on the body, and he also is editor of a journal of Neuroscience. Dr. Barry Arneson is chairman of the Department of Neurology. He's an MD. Neurology is
At University of Chicago.
University of Chicago Medical School in Chicago, Illinois. Neurology is the study of the brain and nerves and the action of the brain and nerves. He is also director of something there called the Brain Research Institute, which comprises people from all over trying to bring to bear their knowledge about advances in nervous system. Dr. Bowden is our member from Canada. He is a pathologist, an MD, and his specialty is diseases of the lung. And he, as a matter of fact, is responsible for discovery one of the major types of cells in the lung. Dr. Michael Brennan, we talked about before. He's was the president of the Michigan Cancer Foundation. He also is a member, also is an editor of Cancer Research, the journal. Carlo Croce, director of the Kimmel Cancer Institute, he has received a lot of prizes for his work. He's a cancer specialist. His MD is from the University of Rome, but all his training since then, all his work since then has been in the United States. And he, in addition to his other duties, he is the actual editor-in-chief of that cancer research journal we were talking about, which is a really singular honor. And in addition to that, he is one of the members of our board who's been elected to the National Academy of Sciences. And I need to tell you a little bit about that because only the real top 1% of practicing or leading scientists in the United States get elected to the National Academy of Science. It's a really prestigious honor. So we're very proud that Dr. Croce has just recently been elected to that position. Dr. Ray Erickson, professor of developmental biology at Harvard. He also is an American Cancer Society professor. They endow his professorship. He also was elected to the National Academy of Sciences, and he's an eminent researcher in cancer. Dr. Gordon Gill, who's chairman of the Faculty of Basic Medical Sciences at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine. He is also chairman of the Division of Endocrinology in the Department of Medicine at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine.
Just to interrupt there, that department is where Dr. David Burns is a member of, who testified earlier in this trial?
Yeah, they're members of the same department.
And he's chairman of the various disciplines in that department. Go ahead.
Dr. Yaklik, spelled with a J, pronounced with a Y, went to Oxford University in England, and that's why it says D.Phil up there instead of Ph.D. That's the English equivalent of a Ph.D., Doctor of Philosophy, from Oxford University. He has been for many years chairman of the Department of Microbiology at Duke University. He likewise is a member of the National Academy of Sciences and an eminent virologist. Dr. Henry Lynch, who's chairman of the Department of Preventive Medicine at Creighton Cancer Center at the Creighton School of Medicine in Omaha, is a unique individual who has studied for many years the genetics of cancer. Back in the earlier days, nobody ever believed that genetics had anything to do with cancer. You sort of caught cancer. Now we realize that cancer is a totally genetic disease. And Dr. Henry Lynch has his fame in that area is because he was able to isolate types of cancer inside families. Cancer does not typically travel in families other than breast cancer, but he found that if you look at certain groups
Excuse me, Your Honor, I'm going to object. This is hearsay.
I think it's a little bit beyond the issue of who these people are, yeah.
Let me just interrupt there. Did CTR play a role in funding Dr. Lynch's work?
it has for many years. Dr. Lynch, since I mentioned it for others, Dr. Lynch has received a number of awards. He was American Cancer Society Researcher of the Year, American Association for Cancer Research Researcher of the Year. He 2 years ago received the Bristol Myers Award for research in cancer. He's a very eminent oncologist. Then there's me, and our most recent addition is Dr. McDevitt. He's professor of medicine at Stanford University, also a member of the National Academy of Sciences. His specialty is immunology. He has received many awards. It's common knowledge that he was nominated for a Nobel Prize not too many years ago. Dr. David Sabatini is chairman of the Department of Cell Biology at New York University Medical School. That's a medical center. That's another prestigious medical center in the United States. And he is editor of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of our most prestigious journals. He's a cell biologist. We need cell biologists because cells are what get disrupted in cancer. Next to the last, Dr. Judy Swain. You notice she also has a named professorship. That means they actually think enough of her to have her being an endowed professor. It says there that she's chief of cardiovascular division at the University of Pennsylvania. She has now moved to Stanford University, where she's chairman of the entire Department of Medicine. She's still a cardiovascular specialist, but she's moved, and she's now at Stanford University, chairman of medicine there. The last one, Dr. Peter Vogt, another virologist. is a member of the Scripps Research Institute, and that might not be as familiar as some of the other institutions. That's a very fine private research institute in La Jolla, California, just north of San Diego. He also is a member of the National Academy of Sciences.
During the course of your answer, you testified that only 1% of the leading research scientists in the country are elected members of the national...
Excuse me, Your Honor, there's no need to recapitulate.
No, I think I understand the nature of the question. I think it's in preparation for the next question.
Thank you. Only 1% are elected members of the National Academy of Sciences. How many members of the National Academy of Sciences sit on CTR's board?
6.
And what percentage of CTR's board is composed of members of the National Academy of Sciences
40%.
as compared to the 1% elected out of the population?
Yes, sir.
Now, you mentioned before some of these members have other experiences as reviewing grants on other organizations. What organizations have these individuals sat in connection with reviewing grants?
National Institutes of Health primarily, also National Science Foundation, American Cancer Society, American Heart Association. Did I say National Science Foundation? Yes.
Now, Dr. McAllister, based on your years of experience with CTR, with Wayne State, with research, applying for grant funds, working with grantees, what is your opinion of the quality and integrity of the members of the Scientific Advisory Board?
I've known the composition of a lot of groups that have evaluated applications, and you just can't find any group that's better than this. It's almost impossible to find. It probably has never been equaled in the United States in biological science grant evaluation. It's a peer review group without peer, is what we say.
Dr. McAllister, I'm going to show you what has been pre-marked for identification as Defendants Exhibit 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Would you just identify that for the record?
These are the resumes. These are copies of the, make sure they're all here. Copies of the resumes of the gentlemen on our Scientific Advisory Board currently.
Now, were these resumes maintained as part of CTR's regular business records?
Yes, sir, they are.
And was it the practice of CTR to obtain this information from the SAB members?
Oh, yes.
Your Honor, I would offer Defendants 1, 2, 3, 6, 2 into evidence.
Do we object, Your Honor? That's the reason. Because side
Let's talk cipher.
For the record, I'm going to offer identification of Defendants Exhibit 1, 2, 3, 6, 2, which are curriculum vitae of past SAB members. Now, Dr. McAllister, are you familiar with past members of the Scientific Advisory Board?
Some were there when I was there, yes.
Can you give the jury a few examples of individuals who were former members of the Scientific Advisory Board
We need a time frame.
during any period of time prior to the current board membership?
I remember Dr. Roz Boutwell, who was a Ph.D. He's emeritus member of the Department of Oncology at the University of Wisconsin. He was, while he was on our Scientific Advisory Board, he was a member of the National Cancer Advisory Board. The NCAB, National Cancer Advisory Board, is actually the policy-making board for the National Cancer Institute. It comprises both scientists and non-scientists, and they don't direct the day-to-day operation of the National Cancer Institute, but they're involved with policy directions. Dr. Boutwell is one of the most eminent cancer carcinogenesis chemical carcinogenesis experts in the United States.
Any other examples?
Sure. Dr. Al Knudsen was a member of our board. He is both an MD and a Ph.D., MD from Columbia, Ph.D. from Caltech. And he is a very eminent cancer geneticist. As a matter of fact, he's responsible for discovery of one of the main classes of cancer genes called, or cancer-related genes called cancer suppressor genes. And he was also a member of the National Academy of Sciences.
Do you know Dr. Leon Jacobson?
He was another member of our board when I came, and he also was a member of the National Academy of Sciences. And he was, his specialty is hematology, that study of the blood, and that's very important with some cancers, a study of the blood. He, in his early days, before CTR.
Your Honor, I don't think it's proper to give a dissertation on the individual members. It's basically hearsay.
Yeah, I think the question basically was who are these people and generally what their expertise was, without going into a long
And
explanation.
I can't cross-examine this.
Right? Go ahead. Stay.
Dr. McAllister, have any members of the Scientific Advisory Board also served as public health officials?
Yes. Dr. Paul Coton, Dr. Robert Hubner, Dr. Peter Howley.
And what positions do they have?
They were employees of the National Cancer Institute at times that they were on our board. They were either laboratory chiefs or section chiefs at the National Cancer Institute.
And the National Cancer Institute is a part of the federal government?
Yeah, that's one of the divisions of the National Institutes of Health.
And during what period of time range are we talking about these individuals who were employed at NCI while members of the Scientific Advisory Board?
Basically from 1962 all the way up to 1986.
So that would encompass the year that the first Surgeon General's report on smoking and health issues was issued, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it would encompass the year in which the Surgeon General's report in 1986 discussing environmental tobacco smoke and health issues was released.
Yes, sir.
In your opinion, based on your experiences and knowledge, what is the quality and reputation and integrity of the past membership of the Scientific Advisory Board?
Your Honor, we object. I don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Your Honor, if you're going to rule on that, I'd like that aside.
All right, let's go talk sidebar. All right, let's proceed.
Continuation.
Dr. McAllister, how many scientific directors has CTR had prior to you,
They've had 4.
and who were they?
First one was Dr. Clarence Cook Little. He was a cancer researcher of some esteem before he joined the board. He'd been working on cancer
The only
research.
question was, what was his name? Not a dissertation.
No,
Is that an objection?
just a moment, please. He's asking the question as to whether his qualifications were, what did he do, his titles, whatever. I don't have no problem with that. Getting any deeper into his work is something different.
Just identify.
Sure.
Just identify each of the scientific directors and describe what their background credentials were.
He was a Ph.D. He had been president of University of Michigan and University of Maine, and he was for, I believe, 16 years president of the predecessor society to the American Cancer Society, American Association for the Control of Cancer. The next one was Dr. William Gardner, a Ph.D. In the Department of Anatomy at Yale University. He was a distinguished cancer researcher. After that was Dr. Sheldon Summers, who was also a pathologist, and his expertise, he's a general pathologist with expertise in cancer, and his most recent position was with the Lenox Hill Hospital pathology department. And then was Dr. James Glenn, we spoke about earlier.
Dr. McAllister, in your opinion, were each of these scientific directors scientists of national repute?
Oh, no question about that.
To that degree, I have no problem with it overall.
Sorry, your answer was?
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned the SAB meets 3 times a year. Do people other than the SAB members attend the meeting?
The scientific staff attends the meeting, Dr. Eisenberg, Dr. Hashim, and also Dr. Glenn.
And what did the scientific staff do during these meetings?
They take notes of the discussions during the applications because it's necessary for us to communicate afterwards with the applicants and to give them feedback from the meeting, discussions that happened in the meeting.
Do they vote, the scientific staff members, other than yourself?
No.
On the grant proposal?
No, they do not vote.
Do members of CTR's board of directors attend the SAB meetings?
No, not at all.
Do the board of directors have any vote or say on what research is funded during those meetings?
Not at all.
Are there any other representatives of tobacco companies that have attended these meetings?
Mr. Moody, when I first started there was a member of something I believe called the Tobacco Industry Technical Committee. And that person was a representative from the industry who had knowledge about research or about manufacture of cigarettes. And he was there mostly as a resource person. And if questions supposedly were to arise, he'd be able to answer those. But that stopped while I was fairly early in my tenure there. This simply wasn't needed.
Did that individual ever vote on a research grant proposal?
No,
Ever
never.
comment on them?
Someone may have asked him something about a cigarette or cigarette smoke one time, maybe one time, but they certainly didn't offer comments. They only offered comments in response to questions.
Now, have lawyers attended on a regular basis these meetings?
No,
Have lawyers ever voted or commented on research applications?
no.
And you mentioned Mr. Jacob earlier in your testimony. Did Mr. Jacob ever appear at an SAB meeting?
I understand he did appear at one meeting of the Scientific Advisory Board in the late 70s.
And do you know what the discussion or purpose of Mr. Jacob attending that meeting was?
Apparently some legal issues about things that CTR could support had come up, and he was there to give what he felt was to give legal advice or counsel to the Scientific Advisory Board.
Do you know what the nature of the legal concern was?
Not in detail. I know it involved some possible aspects of product development.
Did the advice that Mr. Jacob withdrawn, was there any discussion during that meeting, to your knowledge, that research should be avoided because it might turn out with bad results for the industry?
No, that was never a discussion.
Now, does CTR give grant applicants information about its research program?
Every applicant in the application package receives a copy of the most recent annual report and a copy of the policy statement that we have.
Dr. McAllister, I'm going to show you what's been pre-marked as Defendant's Exhibit 13036 for identification. Can you identify that document?
That is our statement of policy.
And is this a part of the material that's distributed to grantees?
To applicants, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, to applicants. Your Honor, I would offer D 13036 into evidence.
Our only objection is the entire packet. You know, this is part of it, but there's the rest of the packet.
You want to see the rest of the packet?
Yeah, the whole packet be put in evidence, not just one page. It's a packet.
You have the rest of the packet?
I don't have it with me. I have
Well,
no
I mean,
objection.
is it available?
It is available, but I don't have it with me. This is a separate standalone document.
I understand that.
But I have no objection.
No objection to having the whole thing in, all right. So as part of the next exhibit, which will be numbered, same number, I guess.
Yes, we'll just put in the
Composite.
entire
Okay.
exhibit. Dr. McAllister, does the statement of policy set forth CTR's policy on grantees' freedom to report their research results?
Yes, it does.
What does it say?
2 paragraphs here. The Council for Tobacco Research USA, Inc., the Council, is dedicated to supporting the investigation of fundamental matters relating to a connection between tobacco use and human health. In so doing, the Council recognizes the importance of independent research by competent investigators. Grants are made only after careful consideration of the individual undertaking the work and his or her institution. The Council desires to have scientists work with the greatest freedom without domination of any kind. It'll make no attempt to direct the administration of a project once it's started, to influence its course or control its results, other than to assure itself that the funds are properly expended for the purposes of the grant and that all the findings are reported in accordance with the best scientific practice.
Is that policy set forth elsewhere in CTR's documents?
Yes, it's also reiterated in the annual report itself. Each annual report has that.
Has CTR adhered to those principles?
Oh, sure, yes.
Dr. McAllister, how many scientists have received funding from CTR over the years?
Over 1,100.
How many publications have resulted from CTR-funded research?
Over 6,000.
And where have they appeared?
They've appeared in peer-reviewed journals. Occasionally, a book chapter is in there, which is not a peer-reviewed journal, but the great majority is in peer-reviewed journals.
And how much money has CTR distributed through its grant program over the years?
Over $300 million.
Now, is that a number that's adjusted for inflation?
No, sir.
We're talking about $300 million in actual dollars as recorded on the books and records of CTR.
In real dollars, yes, sir.
Could you give us some examples of the institutions where CTR grantees have conducted their research work?
Well, virtually all the major research institutions in the United States have received funding from the Council for Tobacco Research. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Johns Hopkins, Duke, University of Chicago, University of California, Berkeley, University of California, San Francisco. Basically all of the major institutions, including the state-supported ones, University of Florida, University of Miami, Florida, University of South Florida. In Florida State has received at least one grant.
Do you know of any of CTR's grantees, either past or current?
I'm sorry, do I?
Do you know any of CTR's grantees?
I'm sorry. Yes, sir. I've met personally probably over 100 in site visits, and by reputation, I know easily that many or more.
What's your view of the quality of their work?
Oh, very high, extremely high.
Well, just in general principles you're talking about, more than 100 some odd people, it's probably either good or bad.
Your Honor, I want to correct one statement. Dr. McAllister has been both as a fact and expert witness in this proceeding.
Yeah, but still, within the limits I've described, okay, just on a general basis.
Generally, Dr. McAllister, what is your opinion of the quality of the work of the CTR grantees?
I think it's very, very high. I know it's very, very high.
In general, what diseases and subject matters have the CTR grantees researched?
Well, of course, cancer, heart disease, pulmonary diseases, the effects of nicotine, studies on immunology, the response of the body to stress. Excuse me. Did I say virology and immunology, involvement with free radicals, all of these topics and others. That's a few.
Have any CTR grantees received the Nobel Prize?
3 have, yes, sir.
And who are they?
Dr. Baruj Benazarath at Harvard University Pathology Department. Dr. Harold Varmus, currently the director of the National Institutes of Health, and Dr. Stanley Cohen of Vanderbilt University.
Have any CTR grantees been elected to the National Academy of Sciences that we were discussing earlier?
Yes, a number have.
How many were elected in the last year?
This last year, 4 grantees of CTR were elected in the 1977 class. The National Academy, of course, is not just biological sciences. It's also mathematics and geophysics. But this year they elected about 60 people altogether. Of those, about 22 were what I would call life scientists. 22 life scientists into the National Academy this year, and 4 of those were ex-CTR grantees.
Your Honor, I have about another 45 minutes to an hour.
Well, unless the jury needs a break. You want a break? All right, take a break. Yeah, sorry. Don't worry about it. Okay. During the break, Doctor, you must not speak with anyone about your testimony, including the lawyers. We'll take a short recess.
Sure.
That's more.
She used to live not too far from where I live now.
Oh, yeah?
So I know what, if she's used to this, if that was too cold for her, I can imagine she's probably just kidding.
You call that kidding?
Then people have a harder time with the cold. Is it true that older people don't feel it as badly?
What do you mean older
The heat.
people? What do you mean by that?
I mean,
older
much older
people?
than you and I. I'm talking about much older than you. I mean, we're middle-aged, but no, you know, so many people come down and I would have a hard time, but apparently older people don't seem to
Heat is
bother.
not as bad if we didn't have the stinking humidity that we have.
That's a killer.
See?
It's a killer.
I mean, I've been in Arizona when it was hot, and never not like here. It's terrible. Humidity's terrible.
All right.
Yeah, I got really steamed just walking from the tram, you know, what do you call it, to here.
I was sitting out on the porch yesterday smoking my cigar, and I'm sweating like a pig. And I ain't even moving. I'm sweating like a pig.
Whatever.
Uno momento.
I didn't know I was supposed to stand up for the jury going out.
Going to
jury out, please.
Bringing the jury, Judge.
Excuse me? Sorry, just do what everybody else does.
Bringing in the jury.
All right, have a seat, folks. Thank you. Proceed. All right.
Dr. McAllister, who makes the decision whether or not to publish the results of the research that the CTR scientists have conducted with CTR funds?
That's solely the responsibility of the individual investigator that's the principal investigator for the grant.
And what is CTR's position with respect to the right of these scientists to publish?
They should publish.
What is CTR's role in deciding whether the grantee should or should not publish?
We have no opinion. If they feel it's publishable, we encourage them to. If they feel it's not publishable, obviously we don't. We have no position on that.
Does CTR have any input on the contents of the publications?
No, sir.
Can you name some of the peer-reviewed journals where the results of CTR-funded research have appeared?
There's hundreds, but some of the most outstanding ones are the Journal of Biological Chemistry, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, Nature, Science, Lancet, Journal of the National Cancer Institute, Journal of American Medical Association, New England Journal of Medicine. The list is like very long.
Has CTR ever suppressed any publication by a CTR grantee?
No, sir.
Has CTR ever told grant recipients that they expect the research results that they publish to come out a particular way or with a particular conclusion?
Oh, not at all. No.
Is CTR's support acknowledged by the scientists in the publications?
Yes, in the publication there's a little paragraph that acknowledges the fact that we and perhaps another agency might have helped support that research that was published in that journal.
And what is CTR's policy with respect to acknowledgement of CTR support?
We expect it. We expect them to acknowledge our support.
Is that decision up to the grantee, though?
Oh, of course. No, that's totally their decision.
Now, do CTR grantees in the institutions where they conduct their research also simultaneously receive funding from other agencies and institutions for that work?
That's typical, yes, sir.
And what are some of the agencies that also co-fund that research?
Ones that we've mentioned before, National Institutes of Health and many of the institutes under it, American Cancer Society, American Heart Association, Environmental Protection Agency, a whole bunch of them.
And is that source of co-funding acknowledged in the article?
Yes, that's also acknowledged in the article.
Is that information contained in CTR's annual reports?
Yes, that was one of the items I mentioned in here, where that they do mention, it says other support, and it does it in the article as well, of course.
If you can do this briefly, Dr. McAllister, can you explain to the jury the ways that research supported by CTR gets out to the public?
Well, we realize that most of the public doesn't read the scientific journals, but the researchers and practicing physicians, when they have time, read journals. Researchers, of course, read them all the time. And public health professionals, of course, also do the same thing. And the acknowledgement usually appears in the paper, but specifically our annual report is read by many people, and we send our annual report to not only deans of medical schools and the libraries, but we send them to science writers. I know there's a list of probably 300 or 400 science writers and newspapers and television stations, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the NBC. We send them to, there's 17 in Florida. The Miami Herald gets them. Florida Today gets it. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of them. And if those writers, in fact, decide that they want to do something with it, then they, of course, can write it if they want.
Can you give the jury some examples of what you would consider to be important contributions made by scientists who have been supported by CTR?
Well, we mentioned, of course, the foundations that CTR helped lay for Nobel Prize. I think that was very important. But as far as specific examples, you want a specific example, right? One of our grantees at Columbia, Dr. David Stern, not too long ago described the discovery of a natural substance in the body which inhibits the clotting of blood. Now, that by itself is not particularly unique, except there's a unique property to this particular inhibitor, and that is that it inhibits clots from forming in deep veins and arteries. So it's important during heart-lung transplant procedures where obviously patients have to have anticoagulants, and sometimes there's a problem with anticoagulants in these really deep, serious operations. And this particular inhibitor has very good promise there. As a matter of fact, it's being marketed now, not marketed, it's being tested by the FDA now as a possible benefit for people who have to undergo these very serious transplant operations. Another example is good because it stretches over a long period of time. Back in the 60s, CTR funded work by a fellow by the name of Massaro. He was studying basic biology of how lung cells divide and how they're fed, and with the idea, of course, that lungs are definitely involved in emphysema, which is associated with cigarette smoking. And at that time, nobody had a really good idea even how the cells in lungs acted naturally. And with an idea of eventually studying emphysema, we funded him for a number of years. And interestingly, just in the last few months, there was an article in the popular press how he has discovered that massive doses of vitamin A may in fact offer some help for sufferers of emphysema. At this present time, it's nothing but an animal study, so it has a long way to go before it actually has therapeutic implications. But I think it illustrates the fact that research takes a long time. It's trial and error and can take 20 years.
Interrupt for a second. Did Dr. Massaro recently receive a particular distinction?
Yes, the American Thoracic Society gave him a Career Achievement Award.
Let me just digress for a moment, Dr. McAllister, and I don't know if you have the articles of incorporation with you.
I don't still. I'm not sure where they are.
Dr. McAllister, would you look at the articles and just tell the jury, what is CTR's purpose?
It says on the first page here, the purposes for which it is formed are to aid and assist research into tobacco use and health, and to make available to the public factual information on this subject.
Okay. Dr. McAllister, could you just, in a few words, if you could, explain to the jury how the type of research that you just talked about fulfills that mission?
Well, we obviously have supported research, fortunately enough, that has been able to be incorporated into therapeutic regimens, and that's not, that of course is what researchers always hope to happen, and the diseases associated with smoking are diseases which are very difficult to study, and I think that CTR has done a lot to help unlock the problems in those diseases.
And are the examples you just described examples of that type of research effort?
That's a couple of examples, sure.
Has the nature of the research that CTR has funded over the years changed? We're talking about the period from 1954 through 1997.
Oh, sure. It's quite different in its orientation because research has changed globally. Some of the earlier studies that were done were epidemiological studies, looking at risk factors, looking at incidence of lung cancer in certain populations, higher in smokers than in non-smokers. And in some of the early days, that epidemiology was questioned by a lot of people, and so CTR sponsored some epidemiological studies, but also from the very start they were working on basic etiology of diseases associated with smoking. I took a decade slice, if you will, and
Okay,
I
could
looked.
you just pause there for a second? At my request, did you look at certain materials in order to help explain to the jury how CTR's research program has changed over the years?
I did, yes.
And why don't you tell the jury what you did and what conclusions you reached?
Okay, I looked in a little, in particular detail at annual reports that came in decades, 89, 79, 69, 59. In 1959, we're talking about the epidemiological kinds of studies. By 1969, there's an awful lot of research in the annual report that has to do with smoking, with trying to set up models for diseases associated with smoking, animal models. There's a lot with smoking itself, trying to develop machines that can reproducibly deliver smoke to animals. There's work on nicotine itself. As we move into the next decade, now we're looking also at smoking and at nicotine, but also at basic biochemical mechanisms that have been implicated. Biological conversion of benzpyrene. We're looking at enzymes that chew up excuse me, some lung cells. It's a more biochemical, more molecular biological approach. As we get into the 80s, it's becoming even more that way. There's still articles on smoking itself and a lot on nicotine, but then the emphasis really is on the molecular basis of disease. And frankly, this parallels what has happened to medicine in general, not just CTR, but we're a very close reflection of the types of studies that are done.
What do you mean when you say it parallels what was happening?
Well, really new areas are opened by new techniques. It's sort of like if you're in a horse and buggy, you can only go so far. If you got a car or a train, you can go further. Eventually, with an airplane, you can explore more, or a spaceship. That's kind of what happens is, as new techniques involve, it lets you look deeper and deeper into the problems associated with these diseases. And that's been true of medicine in general. And of course, that would also reflect CTR's program.
In your opinion, has CTR's research program followed the trends that were evident in scientific and medical research during the contemporaneous period of time?
Very closely, yes, identical.
Dr. McAllister, I want to show you a document that has been marked as part of Composite Exhibit 453 in evidence. And this is that portion that bears dates numbers 707 through 712. Yes. Direct your attention to the last page of this document. First of all, could you just tell the jury what this document is?
The Scientific Advisory Board wrote a report to at that time TIRC, that was the predecessor of CTR, on its first 6 years of operation, so this is early 60s. It's a summary report of things that have happened.
Did the Scientific Advisory Board at that time publish its views concerning CTR's conduct of basic research?
Yes.
Could you tell the jury what the Scientific Advisory Board said about that subject?
Would-
You can look at the,
Yeah, you
I
want
believe
me-
it's the
I'll-
second to last paragraph.
Yes, it's right here. I'll read it if you wish. We must continue to promote true basic research in the intracellular processes of life and in the multicellular living organization, even though in some
Is
instances
that organism?
it says organization.
Okay.
I think it's a misprint, to tell you the truth, Mr. Ruby. I was just reading what it said. I think they mean to say organism. Even though, as in some instances, this will have no obvious or immediate connection with the practical question of tobacco and health.
Now, how does that statement made back in the early 60s relate to what you've testified to here today?
I think this lays the groundwork for it, and I don't think that there's been much deviation from that time.
Have you ever heard the phrase that Thomas Alva Edison is credited with, that science is, or genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration?
Yes, that would surely apply to science as well.
You can just tell the jury how.
Well, even in the really best labs, the absolute top labs in the country, unfortunately, 9 out of the 10 experiments that you design don't work like you think they should. Don't come out with a result that's publishable. Don't come out with an answer that's clear. You have to go back and do more experiments. And one good experiment out of 10 is really considered pretty good. So science is really just a kind of like a trial and error procedure. There's an awful lot of error before you actually end up with something that's positive. And sometimes you have to totally reframe your questions to get the right answer because you've been wrong in terms of how you thought about it. So that's the 1% inspiration and 90% perspiration is very true of scientific research.
Now, Dr. McAllister, in your opinion, has CTR's research program been slanted so as to raise doubts about the relationship between smoking and disease?
No, not at all. No.
Do all of the research that's been published by the grantees support a proposition that smoking is not related to any disease?
No.
Can you give examples of some research where the results might be interpreted to support that kind of relationship?
There's numerous examples, Mr. Moody.
Did you collect a couple of examples?
Yes.
Let me show you what we will mark for identification as defendants 11353. Are these the examples you collected?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, these are.
Now, as briefly as you can, without a complicated dissertation, could you just tell the jury what it is about these particular examples that relate to your view about the results and how they may be interpreted?
Well, the first two of these, Mr. Moody, relate to cancer, and their autopsy studies done very early on. I should say. I should mention that in the first few years of the organization's history, people were identifying that there were changes in the lungs of people that that were associated with cancer, and that cancer was definitely associated with the act of smoking. The second two are dealing with heart disease and coronary and aortic atherosclerosis, or atherosclerotic process, and they both mention very clearly that smoking is a decided risk factor for these diseases. And again, these are early publications.
Okay. Dr. McAllister, the articles that you have in your hand, are they all found in the public domain?
Yes, these are all in peer-reviewed journals that medical libraries would have access to.
In your review, did you find any evidence that CTR tried to suppress the reporting of this type of research result?
I never found any evidence of that.
Dr. McAllister, based on your experience and knowledge, work in scientific research, what is your opinion about the quality of the scientific research that CTR has supported?
We would object. It speaks for itself, whatever is contained in the reports. I don't think it's written.
The quality of the research that CTR supported, not the result. Is that what you're talking about?
Quality of the work that's been supported by CTR is reflected by the publications. That has been an issue.
All right, over.
It's incredibly high. As I look back over these papers, and of course as I see the new ones coming out, I think it's some of the finest research that goes on. I've been at CTR for 14 years, and I've been there while they distributed probably 3/4 of that $300 million. And I have to say that I'm frankly proud to have been associated with the organization. I think it's an honor for me to have been there while they were distributing these funds for what I think is absolutely fundamentally fine research that will definitely pave the way for advances in science and medicine.
Dr. McAllister, have you done any analysis of the type of peer-reviewed journals in which CTR grantees publish versus the rest of the scientific community?
Sure, yes.
And what did you find?
There was an article that came out not too long ago in a newspaper called The Scientist. It's a newspaper for scientists, and they analyzed the highest.
Excuse me, we would object to, this is hearsay, what was contained within.
I'll sustain that objection.
Dr. McAllister, rather than describing the contents of the article, could you just give us your conclusion about how CTR publications compare with science reports published by other scientists not supported by CTR?
In general, you judge the quality of a journal by a number of measures. One of them is how often it's cited by other scientists. By those measures, the two most often cited peer-reviewed journals in medical science are the Journal of Biological Chemistry and the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. Those are the two journals in which our grantees publish the most frequently.
Now, Dr. McAllister, at my request, did you review the various Surgeon General's reports relating to smoking and health issues that have been issued since 1964?
Yes, I have.
Do those reports cite CTR-funded research?
The very first Surgeon General's report cited 38 of CTR's report. This is 1964 Surgeon General's report. Cited 38 CTR publications. Now that's important because at that time, 1963, when they wrote it, CTR grantees had only published 340, 350 articles. So of the total published output of CTR, over 10% of it appeared in the Surgeon General's report. Now eventually, over the life of the Surgeon General's reports, CTR publications were cited over 300 times. And this was not that in spite of what these people at CTR have found, we find something else. These actual articles were in support of what the Surgeon General was saying.
Now, are you aware of other instances where CTR has cooperated with public health officials?
Well, CTR, of course, did cooperate extensively with the Surgeon General early on in the first Surgeon General's report, but also when the FDA was studying whether nicotine should be a controlled substance, CTR a lot of their articles were cited in that report. 75 of those articles were cited in that study.
Dr. McAllister. Right, good. I'd like to show you two documents which have been pre-marked as defendants 15421 and defendants 11141. Dr. McAllister, can you identify these documents?
Yes, one of them is a letter from Dr. Hockett to Staff Medical Coordinator of the Surgeon General's Advisory Committee.
And if I could just interrupt for a moment, would you tell the jury who Dr. Hockett was?
He was the Associate Scientific Director at Council for Tobacco Research under Dr. Little, and he was Research Director until the time I came.
And what does Dr. Hockett do in that letter?
He is telling Dr. Hamill, an MD, Medical Coordinator of the Surgeon General's Advisory Committee, that they had indicated that they wanted some material on the possible beneficial effects of tobacco, and he's sending a list of references in connection with the study. He remarks that it's not sent to represent a case for tobacco or to initiate or support any sort of argument. It simply suggests some topics that indicated possible beneficial effects of tobacco on certain people, certain physical, mental, emotional conditions.
Okay, and that was in response to a request from Dr. Hamill?
Yes, that's right.
What is defendants 11141?
Your Honor, we do have an objection to the acceptance.
All right.
I'm sorry. Dr. McAllister, are you familiar with the term special projects?
Yes.
What are CTR special projects?
That's a group of projects that was instituted by the tobacco companies with advice of their lawyers, and involved research carried out, again, by investigators, scientific investigators, but it didn't involve the Scientific Advisory Board of CTR.
Okay. Did CTR special projects differ from research grants and contracts that CTR awarded?
Yes, they had. There was no involvement of the Scientific Advisory Board. We were basically a check-writing operation for that phase of research.
Now, at my request, did you review materials that CTR has relating to special projects?
Yes, I did.
Could you tell the jury what you did?
I just made a systematic survey of our CTR financial files for special projects and financial correspondence files, and I looked at the publications that had, at least ones as far as I knew, that had come out of special projects, publications in peer-reviewed journals.
Okay. And approximately how many or how much material did you review?
Over half of the files.
And did you select what to review?
No, I just did it randomly.
In other words, all right, but you didn't. I didn't tell you what to review. You chose what to review.
Oh, right. I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question.
Now,
Your Honor, objection, because apparently all of this was done after his deposition, and we were never advised of it.
Your Honor, we're going to go side